Hey, welcome to the show. Today, got a good friend of mine, and Camden's on the show. Our first funny talker to the Camden Otis show, Angus Peacock. And uh, for as long as I've known you, Angus, I've always thought there is no more Brit limey name than Angus Peacock. And I love it. I love telling people I know Angus Peacock, and great to have you on the show, and appreciate you being here this morning.
Thank you very much. The etymology of the name is hard to explain, and we've researched the peacock, and there's no real descriptors or useful information around that. But I do know specifically with Angus, I was named after the cow.
There you go. That's some good beef too, I can tell you that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
I like to consider myself USDA approved beef these days.
So Angus, tell us a little bit about your story. Give us the synopsis, man.
Yeah, so I was born in South London. I'd say South London because it sounds posher. In the 70s, rugby's been a big driver in my life. So I picked up a rugby ball in the first time in around 78. Played for some 20 plus years, mainly in the forwards, played overseas and at home. Then early mid-90s, joined the Royal Navy, spent a few years there, was operational in South America, Middle East, and up in the Baltic Sea area. That was quite an interesting life, and decided round about then the budgets were shrinking under Tony Blair and the Labour government, and decided to get out when I had an opportunity, and went back to school and did a Chinese-French dual language degree in London. Helped pay my way through that by continuing my security service, did a bit of private security work, investigations, that kind of thing, which was quite fun in and around London. There's a lot going on.
So you were a PI then, a private investigator? I thought you just did security.
As PI, I had quite exciting jobs, tracking people down, finding. There's a couple of, and this is late 90s, so I don't think there's any statutes on this, but there's had to track a guy down who'd stolen £1 million from Bank of New Zealand Bank in Auckland, BNZ in Auckland. And then another guy who'd robbed a couple of million out of the stock exchange and was hiding in the south of France. Those are quite funny episodes of my life. Well paid as well.
That's a few steps away from the security I was picturing out front of the bar.
Yeah, not quite. Being on a uniform and standing in a door. Yeah. But yeah, that was a bit of a fluke, but it was quite good money, and it used some skills, or helped maintain some skill sets. And going back to college as a mature student, the thought of working in retail or McDonald's or Starbucks is just so depressing. And so the option came up to, oh, you've been in the military, you've done this, and then a lead came through, as it always does, and spent 2 or 3 years doing that whilst I was doing my college degree. And then as soon as I graduated, within 3 months, I got a job in China, a backpack basically, but what I could in a backpack, and shipped off to Nanjing, which is the southern capital of China, way back when in the empirical years. And from there, worked in industry. It was a vertical learning curve on business management, that's for sure. And cultural sensitivity training. So I went very quickly, ended up in Nanjing for a few years, working in real estate, then up into central China in a place called Guangzhou, which is right in the heart of China, near the Shaolin Temple. It's most famous for being near the Shaolin Temple, most infamous for levels of corruption. Spent a little bit of time up there, and then at that time I'd met Marissa, who's my wife now. So she'd gone to Shanghai for the bright lights city. So after a year up there, I shifted to Shanghai, where I got back into rugby, and ironically, my security experience or private security experience got me some contracts over in China as well. Similar stuff, due diligence, background investigations, all that banana. And but then on the rugby side, got involved with Shanghai Rugby Club, which was formed in the 1800s, and it was a real history. So I was the director of rugby, head coach, and they had this league called the Treaty Port Sports, where Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Hong Kong used to play each other every year, and also the US Marines. The US Marines came into the fold, I think, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, around about the Boxer Revolution. So it's really interesting because arguably the US Marines were the first professional rugby team in the US. Because the commanding officer out there, during the peacetime, if you like, wanted the Marines to stay fit and healthy, so got them into rugby. So I was director of rugby there. I was director coaching of a sports charity called Sport for All. We had 3,000 kids a week coming through a multi-sport program. Built that up from 100 kids a week over a 3-year period. And then got involved with World Rugby. So that was 2009, back into rugby. 2010, got my first coaching accreditation and got on board with World Rugby. So by 2014, when I moved to the US, I'd done the first 2 coaching accreditations and was completing the third, which I completed over here in the US.
So these were the World Rugby accreditations, not the USA Rugby, under 200, 300 sort of things, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I had a little bit of time down there as well with the Canterbury Crusaders down in South Island, New Zealand. So I was very lucky because in terms of coaching development and leadership, my peer professionals in Shanghai, I was the training and educating director of Manchester United soccer schools. So he was at the top of his game. And then we had a bit of budget, so we flew in the guys from Crusaders, and then I went down and visited them and tag team on them on how to coach and coaching evolution, if you like. That was very cool, very humble people. To this day, I'm so impressed with how they operate. It's hard to quantify what I think about.
How did you make the transition from not security, but the real estate, that the mergers and acquisitions, and into now? I mean, you're a professional rugby coach, right?
Yeah.
So how did you make that transition?
So I think so. Business is exciting and boring all at the same time. And I was never really a big corporate guy. I think you called me the consummate rule breaker once, Otis, or something like that. Yeah. So I've never been a big corporate guy. I've always liked being involved in small to medium enterprise where you actually are very close to your product or your people. I enjoy those challenges. I got to a point when I'd moved back to Shanghai. So as the French say, chercher la femme. So I'd sort of decided I wanted to have a longer term relationship with Marissa. So I followed her to Shanghai, and it was big corporate. It was all big corporate. And I'll be honest, I was offered a lot of opportunity. Shanghai was booming back then, but it just wasn't me. It wasn't something I wanted to be involved in. I've always been very keen on helping people, being a bit of a defender or having a vocation rather than a job, I suppose. And that's probably been an underpinning part of my life. And so I think I got, after the security stuff, some of it got a bit dangerous. And with Marissa, I was thinking, man, this is not fair on Marissa. She's not trained for this. She's not equipped for this. So I've got to find something else to do. But having done a lot of that and lifted the lid on a lot of operations, particularly internationally, you get a little bit cynical and you get a little bit jaded. So I just flipped out and serendipity played a big card, because the guys at Shanghai said, we'd like to be the head coach. And my first response was, what, are you out of options? You're telling me you can't find anyone else? Come on. And and then I had a chat with Marissa and said, having played rugby for so long, and we were still in that sort of romantic honeymoon phase of our relationship. And she said, you can do what you like. And then I said, no, you have to listen. This is like going back on crack. You don't come off it a second time. and she went, okay, I'm hearing you. And we agreed. It was a joint decision. I was respecting a relationship. So she was a key supporter. And then I just threw myself into coaching, because what I remembered from my days in the military, and being in the Navy, we had different evolutions, and some were led by Marines and some were led by Navy. Some were, super intellectual Navy folks, engineers, weapons engineers, submariners, and all that kind of thing. And then you get back through with the Marines, who are a lot more, beefy and out of doorsy types, and you get all that outbound adventure kind of stuff. And a lot of the leadership that I'd learned in the military stayed with me through my whole career. And so it was a good opportunity to adapt that back into coaching. And in business, going back into business, it was a real challenge with seeing what you'd learned in the military and where you go in the military and the things you do. And I don't ever claim to be brave or have done anything. There's people out there who've done a lot more than me. Yet, when you go back into civilian life, you see so much lost opportunity, or so many things that people could do better or engage in, but there's just sort of this sort of inertia or intransigence or fear of failure, all these things that you overcome through military service that can make business be fundamentally tedious. And when you get into the leadership,
lost opportunity.
So, engaging. So people who drive business generally on an executive level. So, and they're in their 40s, 50s. So they're the ones that are looking at big picture. But sometimes because of liability concerns or stakeholder concerns, things that might be left hanging out there. So in modern times, you've got disruptors. The biggest disruptor these days is probably Elon Musk with the car industry. He's gone over here and decided that he's going to go completely out of left field, disrupt the car industry in terms of modern technology. Rightly or wrongly, that remains to be seen. But a lot of business is traditionally quite conservative. So when I think what I'm coming to is when you see that they have to appease bottom line and or stakeholders back home, then things that happen on the ground, like in a dislocated or a foreign location, that hearts and minds campaigns that you could get involved with, just don't happen. So they can intrinsically or subconsciously alienate themselves from their communities or their local governments. When you look at opportunity gained, it's funny you asked that question. When I was the director of coaching at Sport for All, our main sponsors were ANZ Bank, Coca-Cola, Jaguar Land Rover, Thermo Fisher. So some big names in there. And in terms of opportunity, these were companies that recognized that they were part of a problem and wanted to be part of a solution. And therefore, they invested, they sponsored all the operating costs of this program because they wanted to be seen as not just wealthy brands, but healthy brands, part of a community, supporting good products, supporting healthcare in China, which is still a tier 2, tier 3 nation. And they said, this is the cost of this compared to the value of this for our brand is negligible. But the people who drove the decisions were the executives. So below the executives, the C-suite executives, there's people in there with ideas that often don't get heard. So you could be doing a 20 to 25 year career in a traditional business before you get heard. Now that's a long bloody waiting game, if you ask me.
Right. I think that a way that a lot of businesses have matured and become set up, the inertia is so ingrained into the culture and into the business. The incentives aren't lined up properly for you to take the aggressive action that's necessary to, like we were talking about performance, to jump to the next sigmoid curve.
Yeah.
There's no incentive for that because people are judged on results. It's not much people being judged based on the information they were using. This is something we've talked about on a prior episode, that if you judge people where it's, okay, I'm in this situation, I see A, I see B, so there's got to be C next. We all agree on that right now. Tomorrow when we show up and it's M, okay, I was wrong, but we all know that we agreed on the information we saw the first time. And that's where the shift needs to happen, is that if you put the incentives more in that direction, you encourage that creativity, and those ideas can come out of the woodwork a little bit more.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point. And I remember, when I was younger, I sort of first getting involved in small business or small organizational management. I remember some really sound advice: take the money piece out and put it over there, and then discuss the operation, or what does winning look like, before you put the money back in. Because all the time you keep the money piece in there, people just go to instinctively bottom line. And I'm not saying the bottom line's not important. It is. Fiscal responsibility is essential. But it's actually, I'm going to bring this right back to rugby. So if you look at a couple of experiments I've done with young teenage rugby players, high school boys, is if you take the contact out, they can do space management and skills. But as soon as you put contact back in a game, all they can do is contact. And it's like business. If you take the money out, you can start provoking other ideas, in a conceptual or hypothetical fashion. As soon as you put the money block back in, all the focus goes into what about the money? What about the money? And it is sort of a similar mindset.
I think that's a great point, because it really, that goes into the framing side of it, where you as a coach, you as a leader, whether it's for a rugby team or in a business, if you can frame it properly and readjust the person's vision to where they're not viewing the money piece as the essential that it obviously is, because you're right, the fiscal bottom line still matters, of course. But if you're able to frame their perspective to where they're not thinking that way and shift them outside that box, you can get the results that you want as a leader.
Yeah, and I'll give you a very live example this weekend up in DC with the training and education department of USA Rugby. And I don't think I'm betraying any secrets here. They've got no money.
Yeah, that's not a secret, believe me. Anybody that touched rugby at all in the last, 50 years knows that USA Rugby doesn't have Sorry to burst any bubbles out there, fellas.
Oh yeah, I know. We're still waiting on our checks down here. They say they're coming.
Come on, world's greatest lie. The check is in the post. Come on, have you not heard that one? It's very interesting conversations, and people, human nature can often get in the way of a lot of things, and so. You could see probably a small percentage of the room said, right, let's be resourceful. How do we deliver what we've got to deliver? Let's think of by other means. What does that look like before we even think about spending a dime or a dollar? And yet there's still a large percentage of that population who are educated professionals in their own right, talking about, well, I can't function if I don't have this and I don't have that. I call them the Gwyneth Paltrows of their industry, because you can't move forward unless the stars are properly aligned, and you've got the right shoes matching the right outfit. And I think part of modern culture has created us as people to be like. Whereas, and again, coming back to rugby, everything comes back to rugby in the universe. Just got to understand.
Well, you say that, but I have to laugh because one of my favorite philosophers, Yogi Berra, the great Yankee catcher, in the 1950s dynasty era. Yogi's written some great books, got some great lines out there. One of the book titles is. What time is it? You mean now?
Yeah.
but I keep waiting because one of Yogi's things that he talks about is how life imitates baseball. And
Yeah.
I keep waiting for the Yogi Berra of rugby to come along because I feel, I mean, I love baseball. It's a beautiful, it's a beautiful American game, and there's so much about it, so many different strategies. But when the more you start to understand rugby, and the more I've learned it over the last decade, it is so much more like life and so much more exposing of the individual player and individual character of that person out there on the pitch when they play and train, and what happens off the pitch, and they replicate. So yeah, coming back to rugby, it's a natural thing. Once you learn the game, it seems to be the reference that we all fall back to.
Oh, and I'd even say
It's
Angus,
like rugby, rest of the universe.
There you
oh
go.
yeah.
I mean, the NFL wouldn't be the NFL without rugby, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I was
Nothing
gonna
would
say,
exist without rugby.
Angus, you've definitely helped me a lot in that perspective, and not much I'd say directly, even though we've coached together and we've worked together and talked about this. But you and I had the conversation a few years ago when I was starting with the Engage Foundation here. And you made a comment to me about, we love rugby. We know rugby's the best. No one else, but not everyone out there knows that. You have to offer more. It's all about increasing your value to people besides just being a free sport opportunity. And as I've shifted and worked with the board, our board, to change the Engage Foundation to work more towards that and build all of those values, I appreciate it so much more inside the sport. Like I'm out there coaching with U of A, and I'm talking to these college boys, and it's like, oh my gosh, they need to come out and hear these little kids talk about preparation and heart and passion and all this stuff that they're getting this, and it gets getting them excited that's really what you got to tie into the game, and that's the difference maker in the long run. And then of course you tie it back into life. Those type of things are what makes a difference in life too, because everything goes back to rugby. Life revolves around rugby, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so good to hear, because I think if you look at traditional coaches go and play in a league or a competition, tournament, whatever, and there's sort of single point of focus is how many wins can we get, which is okay. That's competitive. It's noble, and I don't see any real issues with that until that becomes your driving force. And if you look at rugby, you look at any sport, but we're going to talk about rugby because there's only airtime for rugby. Is the fact that it's human resource management under pressure, and you're taking, in your case, a group of young folks, and you're doing something for that, and you're taking them from environment A, like the training paddock, and dropping them into environment B with very little interaction or time, into a sort of a competitive environment, which is, it's like any industry. We've got to stress test our product, or we've got to stress test our service. And I think you as a coach, Cam, you're quite enlightened because you're thinking about this stuff already. When I started playing rugby, is Europe, the UK, Europe, there's a lot of community sports. Most of the big names out of sport come out of a community-based environment, a club, a soccer club, rugby club, even track and field. You've got after hours, whether it's after school or after work, but it's after hours options. That's where you hone your skills and your talent. So the importance. Here we go. I'm gonna try something. This is the Yogi Berra Rugbyitis, just for you. The importance of a coach in rugby is probably inversely proportional to the actual resources they have to deliver the product.
That's good.
Break that down, because I
knew you were going to pick on me.
Inverse proportionality.
Go on, sorry, start again.
No, I like that, because I want you to break that down, though, because the inverse proportionality of the importance of the coach to the outcome of the game or the match. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So if you look at So if you look at resource-rich environments, and I'm not going to name any names, but you've been in Colorado high school rugby enough. You've been around camps. So look at if you try and visualize our spread of high school boys 15s teams. I don't see, and then look at any given portion of that league, and split them into say top 4, next 4, and so on. The resource-rich teams aren't necessarily the best in terms of out-and-out wins or win-loss ratio. So there has to be more than something in the game. And then you look at, if you come down, and because we sort of like to glorify the top end, because they're exciting and they're glossy and they've got a nice uniform and whatever, yeah, well done you. But when you look down at teams that have fewer resources, money in the bank, equipment, 30-year-old rugby balls and a stack of cones that's like gone through a half-life of 500 years, right? And they're running around in the park.
They're all the same color because they've been out in the sun.
Yeah, they're all bleached. And yet they still get league in their appropriate level of competition. They're still getting wins. The players still know how to play the game. So I see myself as an intrinsic coach. So you come to any given one of my sessions, there's a handful of cones, a bunch of balls, and a lot of space. You will not see a ton of hit pads, bags, yada, yada, yada. Because a lot of my focus is on executive decision-making, space management, game-based or contextual, real-based scenarios. And whilst there's certain things you can bring in on a temporary basis to help with, managing contact or combat or whatever you want to call it, ultimately, the big challenge is we're dealing with a group of young people or players who come from different backgrounds, with different educations, different professions, different family lives, different everything. So as the leader of this group, I've got to create a product or a service that keeps them all engaged. And that's bloody hard. It's not easy to do, and I think I'm blessed by life experience. And then when you get assistant coaches, you've got to try and get them as advocates for what you do. Now, the path of least resistance with your players is stand in a line, run into a wall, come back, do it again. We're going to repeat and rinse, or rinse and repeat for another 5 minutes. What does that achieve? It achieves the ability to stand in a line and run into a wall. Where does that transition into an actual game or the game of life? So you, as a coach, I think the more you take people's data analytics away, the more you take away their equipment, the more you take away all the things that are sort of the drugs for their coaching industry, the more they have to tap into learn more knowledge, think about how to engage players, think about conceptual, how to coach concepts like space management versus, you've run up and down a line and you've made 50 passes, well done.
So, you know what, as I'm listening to this, you know what, it's usually the way that Camden and our stories seem to go, business, and then that's like rugby. What you've done, what you've done with your career path is you did all this business.
Yeah.
And, and you had the hobby of kicking, playing a little footy, as you would say. And then all of a sudden the footy became your life. And so what I'm really curious about, because we always talk about taking rugby and applying it to business, but how did you take business and apply it to rugby?
Yeah, that's a phenomenal question. And I've met over time some phenomenal people in industry. And man, that's a good question. So
I was about to ask, is when you say in industry, is that British for in business, the business world?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I had to clarify that for all the Americans out there.
Yeah, everything's an industry of sorts. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so I remember by the time I graduated high school, so late, the 80s were interesting in London, or England anyway, because you had Maggie Thatcher, Falklands conflict, race riots, miners' unions, all the unions being bust out, and we were probably as close to civil war in the UK as since Cromwell's times. It's a very interesting period to live in. So by the time I'd graduated high school, the UK as was had been through several recessions, and the prospect of getting a job was sort of might as well buy a lottery ticket.
Mhm.
And so I got my first job out of school and was in the finance industry, and I sat at a desk thinking, I'm going to do this for the next 45 years. Holy shit. That's not a good choice. So the first opportunity, I packed my bag and I went off to Canada and played rugby. I call it a semi-pro contract. It's called boot money back then. There's no one getting contracts.
Boot money. Is that what that was?
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. That's a slang term I hadn't heard yet. Boot money.
Boot
That's a
money.
good
So
one.
no one was technically paid anything to play rugby. It's all in spirit, amateur. But you got all your costs covered and a little bit of pocket money at the end of the week.
There was money left over after you bought a new pair of boots. It just
Yeah, exactly. And just in those boots, you lift the, oh look, what's in there? Oh, look at that.
I know
Very
some
speed.
boys who played college football who got some things like that.
Oh.
So I think fast forward, what I'm coming to is he came back home, struggled to get a job, started actually a part-time job, no, full-time, working in an advertising agency through a friend of mine through rugby. Then went into the military, started basic training as a junior rate in the Navy, and then ended up at Naval College. And then from there, back to university, yada, yada, all those things I said earlier. Every point in my life, I can look back at someone in a leadership role who left something positive in my brain. And as you get more and more into leadership, so switching out from Naval College back into the real world, and you realize you've got innate skills, you start using them and you start moving up the leadership food chain. I would actively seek out mentors who'd been, maybe 15, 20 years older than me. I come from a dysfunctional family, so that was never going to be my dad, right? Unlike you, Cam, you've got an amazing mentor in your old man. I didn't have that option, so I consciously made an effort to go and find people that I respected, and I spoke to folks I'm still in touch today who are in the logistics industry, rail industry, oil and gas industry, CFOs, CEOs, advertising industry, human resource industry, and I just engage them and speak to them, buy them beer and listen to what they've got to say. So coming back to your original question, Otis, it was the experience of all those different groups of leaders had an impact by the time I came back to rugby on what to be versus what not to be. And within that, I come back to player-centric coaching. I remember clearly as a player the type of coaches I engaged with. And have this underlying philosophy of players want to play. And that's it. And I never move away from that. So with that underlying facet, players want to play, everything falls out of there. How do we keep players engaged to give them opportunities to play? Which sort of reverse engineers the process of cutting players for not being good enough. Or it doesn't make it any easier. I've got a list of players in front of me this morning for this New Zealand exhibition game. I've got to let a bunch of them go. And quite honestly, the yellow streak down my back says, how can I stave that off? Because I'm just an absolute coward. I don't want to be the architect of someone's disappointment. I have to be. But I think in a sort of an exact sum up of that is in the rugby world, I'd already decided as a coach the type of coach I want to be. I'm quite competitive, can be quite combative, but equally I like to be as open and transparent as I can. So which means you set the scene early, with your players coming in. Here's who I am as a person. Here's who I am as a coach. And don't really mind your background. I'm not that interested in it unless you want to share with me. And there's an age or a generational difference, but we can find ways to connect without crossing boundaries. But here's my set of standards. Here's my expectations. understand this job is hard. Coaches are human too. But let's enjoy what we do.
Leaders. I think that gets, great coaches are great leaders, and you really, it gets kind of whitewashed a little bit, that because they just talk about great coaches. But, if you go back and you start to look at the great coaches from all the sports, they didn't just know the game. They were great leaders. And I think, what you were just saying, when you set the stage early on, that just, that's that setting that foundation of, here's my core values. One of the things when I work with businesses, I work with them about establishing their mission, establishing their core values, creating that vision, and all of those things, and making sure it's understood throughout the organization. And that's exactly what you're doing when you form a team, as you do, this all-star team to play in the match here in a couple of weeks. So, it's, you establish that foundation, and then they have to buy into it, right?
100%. And the question I'm going to flick back at you two, because I want to have a sip of this coffee again, is how do you create empathy? You don't buy it in the gym or in a shop.
Well, you create empathy by understanding and listening. I mean, empathy. So first off, empathy means I understand what you're feeling. I'm not feeling sorry for you, but I can agree with it. Okay, you're feeling that way, right? That's okay. I'm sorry you feel that way. Or really, it's not even that. I mean, I think that's a step too far too. It's, I understand why you feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sorry you feel that way, but I understand why you feel that way. And that's empathy. At least that's how I define it. And when you demonstrate that to your team, and team in the broader sense, not just a sports team, that you understand the problems that they're dealing with at that level. That young sophomore who's got some good athletic skills, but his rugby GPS just isn't quite there. So I understand how you feel when I cut you. I'm going to cut you, but here's the reason why.
And that's, so I think coming back to one of your original questions is, I remember going to Naval College and getting all the usual crap you get served up by the senior NCOs about, you're from South London, you're posh, or just being in Naval College, full stop. and in terms of empathy,
you shopped at that fancy, not Lloyd's. Damn it. Never mind, because I can't think of the name of that fancy store in South
Harrods.
Harrods, there you go. Shopped every day, right?
Yeah, I was born in Harrods, mate. I grew up in the toy department. I ate all my dinners out of a silver platter in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
But I remember, and without this turning into a Monty Python sketch, I had my first job around 14, 15. And round about that time, my brother and I were expecting some manual labour around the house, and digging a garden. And we had a garden on a bed of chalk, which, when you say digging a garden, it conjures up things of flowers and soft soil. My brother and I, every weekend, our dad said, "One of you, there's a sledgehammer for one of you, pickaxe for the other. Get out! You got to break down all the chalk in the garden." So, and then moving on from there, I remember 17, 18 working in McDonald's, which was a step up from all previous jobs at that time. So I'd worked in a McDonald's kitchen, I'd cleaned toilets, dug roads or whatever. All that stuff, the empathy created. So by the time you get to a senior management or executive role, you retain some of that. You retain some of that in your DNA. And, the forces of got to say business, Cameron, not industry. Forces of business. See, I can learn. See, there's another trick. Learn and apply. But the forces of business, they really force you to focus into those appropriate areas with your CFO, CEO, COO, which is fine. But I remember way back when, the old backyard philosophy of don't forget where you've come from. And with human nature, that is so, so true. And over time, I've had people say things to me, you know, and when you're dealing with some of the disparaging comments, you know, it's easy to say, well, mate, I didn't start here. I didn't land in Naval College, or I didn't land in the C-suite. Here's some of my background. And they change up immediately. You can almost see an instant, you know, physical resonance where they go, oh, okay. Because people like to assume, human nature, we assume that everyone's got something better than us, or everyone's life is you know, rosier in the garden and all that kind of stuff. So I think empathy is really, really important. I only know a potted, you know, history of your career, Otis, but if you look at where you started, it sounded like you made a conscious choice that before I get to there, I'm going to enter in here. Mm-hmm. And whether you liked it or disliked it, that experience, yeah, eating a bit of grit with your grill is really important. So when you do get in those leadership roles, people respect that. Otherwise, I think the flip side of that, and I might be talking out of turn here, over in Shanghai, you know, in the early part of the 21st century, it was booming. There's just money all over the place. It's unbelievable. And you've got all these MBA grads going into leadership roles. And I was going, how on God's green earth are these people doing their jobs, right? Because I couldn't get, in the main, a simple operational response out of a lot of them on anything. So you just talk to them and go, well, you're on a six-figure salary running a part of a business with several hundred or several thousand people. What makes you equipped to do that? Oh, I've done an MBA. Now, the MBA to me is the best packaged bloody piece of education ever. Well done you for selling that. And industry completely bought into the MBA. But I didn't ever notice much in the way of empathy, life experience, gritty job experience in many of these people. Yet they're the next leaders of business. I want to say industry, Cam, so much.
I would say that that doesn't mean that to be a good leader you have to go sit in the trenches. You have to come from nothing. But what it really means is you have to be able to understand it. So there's some great people that have come from nothing. I mean, you know, Tony Robbins. You look at Tony Robbins' story, and you know, he didn't. He grew up, you know, not being able to afford new clothes, not getting, not eating every meal, all these sort of things, and that was his catalyst that just had him explode into this person he is.
Yeah.
But just because you didn't, you know, grow up living in poverty or anything like that doesn't mean that you can't be a great leader and can't have empathy. But you have to be willing to listen and have to be willing to learn and grow from that, you know, reading, experiencing. When things get bad, you know, my favorite line is pick up the damn shovel, go grab the mop and start mopping the floor if the floor needs to be mopped.
Nothing's ever below your pay grade.
Yeah, and that's
absolutely.
How. It doesn't mean that, you know, you can't be born with a silver spoon in your mouth and be a great leader and have, you know, empathy for your organization and your teammates and all of that stuff. It may be harder to truly have empathy because, you know, you had that silver spoon, but you know what, you can still figure it out.
Yeah, I think you're right. No, absolutely. I think for me, the key point you just made is be willing to listen and be willing to learn. Mm-hmm. You know, you've got to be. But again, coming back to one of our earlier points where we talk about enabling failure, I'm having that conversation with your boss.
Well, you know what? If I ever work for somebody again in that sense, other than a client, that will be a number one requirement is that they allow failure, because how else are you going to challenge yourself? How else are you going to grow? How else are you going to learn? Other than to throw it out there, take that step and say, what the fuck, man? Here we go. At some point, you know, what's the worst that can happen, right?
Well, coming back to rugby Yogi Bears, I remember.
Berra.
Say again?
Yogi Berra. I'm going to have to buy you that book and see.
Yeah, you will. I remember back in the day, a rugby friend of mine, we were actually talking about dating, not getting jobs. I think the analogy transitions quite nicely. I said I was like, going through a period where meeting girls was a bit of a challenge. He went, mate, I've been blown out more times than a windsock. Eventually you're going to strike. And now he's married with 2 kids. So that's what we've all got to, and there's, to me, you get knocked down so many times in a game of rugby.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to find ultimately the ability just to keep standing up.
Oh yeah.
Another step forward. And that is really where it is a game of life, We're coming back to this team I'm coaching right now. I just said to the boys at the outset, there's 54 of you trying out for 26 spaces. I don't know what your schooling's like, but that's fairly simple mathematics, fellas. And so all we ask of you is express yourselves positively, which is a broad concept. Mm-hmm. And we say what that means is put yourself in a silo. So I divide the team into silos. So you've got front 5, back row, half backs, which are your 9s and 10s. Then your midfielders, and then your outside backs, wingers and fullback. Or sometimes they just put back row with 9s and then inside backs, 10s, 12s together. Because I like, depending on what mood I'm in, I like to have a second playmaker out there. Then the outside backs, the outside centre through to back 3. So say first choice you have to make is put yourself in the silo that's right for you. And then you're going to have a better chance of success. So we give them like maybe 20% of our sessions to make that decision, right? And then from there, we're saying, right, express yourself positively. All this means is show us what you can do. So we're looking for. Don't show off. We just need to see what you've got. And we might move you into another silo, but if we can understand what you're capable of, then we can enable more success for you. But don't be frightened of falling down, right? If your behavior is transition, it's showing off is because you're going to hide something or you've got a fear of failure or whatever. We're going to look a little bit closer at that. But what we'd rather look at is what skill sets have you got? If you've got a fear of contact, we can adjust and spend more time at contact. If you've got skill deficits in catch pass, we can adjust and spend time on catch pass. If we can see we've got kickers who need help, we can bring someone in to help you evolve your kicking skills. And that comes back to your question, Otis, how do you bring business back into coaching? I think that's a classic example. I may not have thought about running programs like that or sessions like that if I hadn't been in industry. Sorry. DNA's defeated me.
I'm in your head, Angus.
I really appreciate it, Angus, and this has been a lot of fun getting you on the show. So we always wrap it up with what you learn, and I'll go first today since I picked on Camden the last couple of shows. And actually, that's the advantage because then you don't have to come up with something original if somebody steals your idea. I think the point I learned is my brothers in the Marines were the first professional rugby players in America. That's what I love is those little, the Marines are such a unique organization. I mean, the Royal Marines are very similar to our U.S. Marines in that makeup and the uniqueness of their thought processes and their operations and their missions. And the fact that the U.S. Marines were playing rugby in China in the late 1800s, early 1900s, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Camden.
Well, shit, you stole mine, my main one. So I'm gonna go with my joke one I had ready then, because that was my serious one. I learned that not all Brits are born with a rugby ball in your hand, because Angus, by my math, you said it took you about 5 years to pick up a rugby ball, and that is just far, far away from any information I've heard.
Yeah, I started in soccer.
You in the crib right away.
I started in soccer, mate.
The hooligans.
All right then.
Yeah, the hooligans game. Yeah, absolutely.
So Angus, what'd you learn?
And beyond how easy it is for Cam to insert himself into my psyche and disrupt my thinking. I it's the reaffirmed learning. Engaging in an environment like this is a ton of fun, and the ability to tag team with like-minded people on sharing opinions, knowledge, experience is an absolute. It's just healthy, and it brings a lot of wealth into your life. You know, we are sitting here from completely different backgrounds, sharing experience around one common love, really, which is rugby. And, yeah, well, it's one of my big advocates for rugby as a sport. Is it ties, it creates bonds. It's one of the world's best networking and undersold networking environments. So there's a lot of garbled learning in there for you.
Hey,
No clear thinking.
Give us the quick down and dirty on the high school match, the touring side from New Zealand.
Go on. Sorry.
When and where can we, watch the match, check it out, buy tickets, whatever?
So it's free. So it's an open house. It's on December the 10th, 5 p.m. kickoff on the turf at Infinity Park in Glendale. And if you go on rugbycolorado.org, there's a big panel on the homepage if you want to make a donation. So whilst we're not charging fees to come and watch the game, we want to make sure the overhead is covered. We've made a commitment to buying unique playing uniforms for the players, as well as exchange gifts for the other team. So any donations there help. $10, $5, whatever it is. It's just a contributor. But I think the biggest thing would be seeing 200 or 300 people out watching this game,
Awesome.
And out, just outside of winning objectives. I think the biggest win for this would be have not just the boys on the field, but having a bunch of locals out there having a great time, and this visiting New Zealand family going, man, I can't wait till we next return to Colorado.
That's great. We'll be sure to put some of that information in our show notes and the link to Rugby Colorado.
And they are going to do a haka. For anyone who culturally is aware of the haka, they promise they'll do a haka. And just to close out, just thank you for your support in rugby, but also I know Memorial Day and Veterans Day and Remembrance Sunday's gone, but thanks to everyone out there who provides service for our countries and often get overlooked. If you ever want to come to a rugby game, look me up.
Yeah. Thanks, Angus. Thanks for your time, and great show. And thanks everybody for taking a little bit of time out of your day to listen to us and give us some feedback when you get a chance. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here, Angus.
Cheers, man.